we've talked about it before, as you may recall, mirror neurons being this aspect of the brain that's literally responsible for mirroring energies, responses, and perception as a whole. But there's an aspect of mirror neurons which is related to trauma and the way that we see ourselves, which I think is the most underappreciated part of this whole aspect of the psyche, which is that whenever you experienced what feels like trauma, in other words, something that created a negative polarity state, something that caused resistance, shame, guilt, fear, a feeling of suppression inside you energetically, what that does is it splits your perception. And inside of your own brain, the mirror neurons will start to create a split between your wounded self, the one that once experienced these external circumstances that made you feel victimized, and now the witness self inside of you, this other part of your psyche, is going to start to look at you like you're the wounded self. So basically, your identity goes through a permanent shift if you're associating with yourself as the one that is wrapped in the trauma or the negative emotional experiences that once collapsed in your field. So think of it this way. You, as a mirror of consciousness, saw certain things play out. And you, especially if you were a child when these things happened, you accumulated the emotional weight of the experiences. So you start to feel the mirror showing you things about yourself, whether it's somebody criticizing you, ridiculing you, somebody abusing you, putting you down in any way. And you internalize that mirrored response as the truth. So now part of your psyche starts to put up the same exact mirror and identifying with the perception of the other that once implanted in you the negative emotions, you start to now mirror that kind of shame energy, or you put yourself down. You create any kind of internal resistance, which keeps you in the same loophole of the one that once perpetuated the trauma, and you become the perpetrator. And you know that this is happening in you if you currently feel any of these repetitive emotional loops where you feel ashamed of yourself, you feel fear, you feel contracted, maybe you doubt yourself, or you keep yourself in self-scrutinizing energetic loopholes of despair or victimhood. That's a sign that the role that your mirror neurons right now are playing is they're allowing you to stay in that same mode of thinking you are the one that deserves to be put down. And that's a part of your own psyche projecting that same kind of abuse onto you. That is actually the role of the mirror neurons. Not only are they picking up on feedback from other people, but they're using this as an internal feedback system, not for you to necessarily stay abused or to feel infiltrated by negativity your whole life. Not at all. They create the resonance for you to now realize that is karma inside your system, as in a deeper lesson that your soul came here to appreciate and understand how to understand the importance of and the value of, and then disentangle from it. And then sense that what you were seeing was somebody else's mirror. That's somebody else whose mirror neurons once experienced the exact same energetic show as you're now going through. Their pain body was once also infiltrated. They once stored the repercussions of somebody else not integrating their own trauma. And that's the nature of karma. It's a domino effect. It passes through the lineage generations by generations. And it's like this kind of virus program, like a supercomputer of sorts, starts to infiltrate different fields, which can trace back to all kinds of historic moments of oppression, abuse, suppression of feminine energy, all kinds of patterns which infiltrated the collective psyche once that caused people to doubt themselves, to rid themselves of the authentic energetic flow, and to then pass that same pain onto their children and descendants, which can look like a survival program. It can look like parents teaching their children to silence their truth, to not lean into their spiritual lessons, to doubt their intuition, to stay in a mode where they are people-pleasing or just serving others' needs instead of really focusing on what is sacred within them that needs to be supported as part of a release of that past trauma and karma, and instead moves into the creation of the new. But whenever you're inheriting a program which causes you to not identify with yourself now as a source of soul truth and new energy that wants to flow, and instead you're just feeling like you're in this loophole of your past and what was once programmed and conditioned into you, that's a telltale sign that you haven't learned to integrate that karma because your mirror neurons are still playing the same role that's been potentially even ancestrally encoded in your family field. So this stuff is extremely deep. If you think about it, what you're now storing as this energy that's mirrored inside you very likely is not your own energy. It can be an ancient program of resistance, and belittling the self and creating various splits, which can be confusing because when you feel them inside you, they do feel foreign. And so you might not know how to disentangle from them because you definitely didn't consciously create them. These were energies you either observed, you picked up on, maybe you saw other people holding the same energies, which is also what the mirror neurons do. If you saw, for instance, your mother or father hating themselves, drinking, or coping negatively with some emotions, feeling victimized, then you saw that. You saw the despair in their eyes. You felt it in their body language. Maybe as a child, you didn't see openness and the energy of coherence even healthily demonstrated. And because of that, the mirror neurons pick up on, oh, okay, that's a strategy I'm supposed to also include in my own development. And that's my safety mechanism, just repeating what I've been seeing as the familiar orientation of the nervous system. So this has nothing to do with if that's actually the healthy response or the integrated response. We learn based on mainly what was exemplified and demonstrated. And so if now, as a wise witness, you're seeing even the role of how your mirror neurons are causing you to deflect wisdom away from yourself. So you're instead going into this past loophole and you're perpetuating the cycle and you're recognizing, oh, I'm treating myself exactly how maybe these perpetrators of abuse in my past treated me. Then you can at least create space between this activity happening between your wounded self and your witness self inside you, and then start to generate a new kind of witness program. So this is where it gets very interesting. Mirror neurons aren't only responsible for picking up on signals that you're mirroring from other people or even how you're seeing yourself. They can also be rewired when you create a new kind of relationship to yourself. Because just like how somebody once treated you that created an internal mirrored response, if you start to treat yourself differently, in other words, you start to look at yourself with love, you start to experience this energy of self-compassion building in your field, like you're smiling to yourself internally, you're giving yourself a hug, metaphorically or literally, and you're actually meaning it, like you're actually intending to give yourself a new kind of treatment than what you once experienced, and to melt resistance, and to support a new state of consciousness where you're allying with yourself instead of maintaining these inner blockages. Your mirror neurons will start to demonstrate that loving relationship, and that becomes habitual. So that's how self-love becomes a biochemical cascade at that point. No longer are you associating with what created this trauma like adrenaline and cortisol in the past by keeping that part of you alive that's been in fear or denial and resistance. Now you start to implement this energy, which biochemically looks like oxytocin. It's like you giving yourself a hug and feeling the self-affection. And that's filling in the gaps where you once didn't experience what would create a healthy kind of mirror neuron dynamic within yourself, which is also the nature of inner child healing. So whatever you once didn't experience now needs to be supplied as part of a deeper kind of relationship with you that then mirrors that same experience outside of you. Because that's what needs to happen as the prerequisite before people start to treat you differently. And that's what ends up attracting more sacred relationships. That's what changes the patterns in all kinds of dynamics that you experience, because they too are mirrors of your self relationship, which comes down to the mirror neurons. But this is why it's very triggering, because all this is a prelude to my point of how everything's feeling more and more karmic. Because if you haven't been seeing that you are actually the precursor to these external dynamics and relations that are being projected on the mirror of your consciousness as your literal life, then right now what's being revealed is that all these elements in you that have been the roots that needed to be pulled up and evaluated, that's what now is being seen by people that didn't want to face them in the past. And then it's bringing up the question of, like, do I first need to change my external reality, or do I need to allow myself to reconsider how I've been naturally birthing my reality from underneath the surface based on what you've been holding that you've been unwilling to fully process and let go of? So that's what reality ends up mirroring, everything you didn't want to see and face. And that's why karmic lessons are typically the most difficult ones that keep on repeating, like you're on this merry-go-round over and over again. It's happening. I kind of got this vision this morning of now the universe is slowing down the merry-go-round so you don't feel like you are able to just keep going in the loop, but you're being illuminated as, okay, what are you doing on this merry-go-round? What are you actually holding within yourself that's creating the cyclical motion? Because karma is like a 2D circle. You feel like you're going in this loop, but the nature of the energy you're storing is it's meant to create a spiral of evolution. Because if you spiral into what you've been holding, you'll find in that exactly the release point, almost like a acupressure release point in the body. If your fascia physically feels stiff, remember we talked about fascia many times as what is the network that stores all of these trapped emotions and density, which is literally the unintegrated karma that needs to be faced. If you even press some of those trigger points in your physical body, you're going to feel like that's instigating this painful release of what's been kept within the fascia, what's been dense, what's been creating knots in your muscles, keeping stiffness in your body. And then it has to lead to an emotional release because that's what allows there to be flow instead of the same knotted energy coming back that needs to be confronted. So it feels like at this time, a lot of people that didn't want to see those deeper things, they're starting to see it, and it's happening kind of in an autonomic way. Like you need to confront it, but it's actually the biggest gift because to move forward and to get to this next collective stage, I believe even, we need to all choose to look at these aspects that have been creating the impasse, as that's what creates the frequency shift from the lower self to the higher self embodiment. The prophetic messages often are things from the future, which are mirrored in the present moment, which the mirror neurons can also pick up on. And it's kind of like the job of the anima consciousness, so that feminine part of all of our souls that can pick up on these energies in our dreams through synchronicities, through things that are mirrored beyond us, even that we can see and then we realize that's synchronistic. There's something important about that as a message or a sign, or it's maybe feeling like catalytic energy that you're seeing, and it creates an emotional movement inside you because you recognize in a deeper way that that occurrence is not a random one, and it's sparking in you some emotion that shows you there's something deeper to see and feel about that and yourself. And so prophetic messages can also be somewhat triggering. That's another interesting thing. It might create in you now this knowing that you need to go back into your past to release something before you can offer yourself the opportunity to experience a new future outcome. And so we're in between these points right now, really being forced to contend between the past that hasn't been fully worked through and then future states that we want to experience. But that can't be unless we first finish those karmic cycles that are still drawing us back into our pain body. That prophetic messages aren't meant to elevate the ego or create grandiosity. It shouldn't make you feel like you're a chosen one if you've been receiving these messages or intuitive hits, because the purest frequency of prophetic knowing is it really humbles you. It's what makes you slow down. It's almost like the universe putting the brakes on and you feeling that now you're ready to slow down the pacing of your life and to kill some of that external noise and really look at what within you needs to be more deeply felt and embraced so that you can understand you are the source of what is unfolding. And that insourcing of energy and information is what allows you to then receive more and more feedback to make the appropriate steps going forward. So I feel that's a clashing of energies that's now being provoked. More and more people, because of the confusion and the volatility, this pendulum swinging energy, they're trying to grasp. There's like this motion of, trying to figure out like, who can I reach to for solutions? Where can I go for a source of clarity? Maybe even physically looking for prophets. A lot of people in the New Age community trying to predict things that are going to happen. But really, we're in a quantum universe. There's so many different timelines that are available to us. So the prophets that say definitively, like, this is the way that things are going to unfold and prepare yourself for it, maybe even fear mongering to create certainty in their predicted future timeline, I feel really can't be trusted because we're all collectively creating this simulation of sorts, and it's mirroring our anticipation, our internal feedback, and the coherence we're storing. So instead of trying to predict the future, we just need to get really narrowed into what signs are we currently feeling? Because what's in our emotional and pain bodies right now is what's going to create the future. We don't need to predict anything. We just need to feel what are we looping? What's the hamster wheel we're still stuck in? And then resolve that. Because if that happens, then we're going to feel this lightness emerge, a clarity, and maybe even a lack of desire to predict anything going forward. We just start to feel the release of weight. And in that process, we start to define more deeply, what do we want to do with our own soul's knowing? Because that's where creativity is born. That's where trust is cultivated, and where we feel like we really are this autonomous source of energy and consciousness that is set to move forward into whatever future we're all collectively co-creating at this time. So the last point here is how deep is the importance of understanding cause and effect? And I think that really comes down to the mirror feedback. It's all really cause and effect game. We have to understand the cause to really master how we're always creating the effect, but the causality is most important. We don't even need to focus so much on changing the effect. We just need to allow ourselves to move into that we are the cause of the experience. And that can be either super triggering if you don't want to take responsibility and hold yourself accountable for how life is playing out, or it can create a complete liberation if you really start to understand what am I entangling with energetically and vibrationally. And you shift through these internal variables of attachment until you feel I'm actually mastering where my energy is flowing. I'm mentally clear. I'm emotionally congruent. I'm choosing love for myself. I'm letting myself energetically flow in some ways instead of just being drawn into what my past wounded self is telling me I can't do, or what I need to be suppressing more and more. So that clarity has to open up through us and because of us. And I think that's the main call to action, you guys. Really letting ourselves feel like we are in charge of how our psyche is operating and what we're seeing as the mirror of our experience, because we are the mirror. It's not just the external mirror. It's literally through the work of our mirror neurons, we can see we're actively generating the entire perception of this experience. And the inner one has to start first. So think about it and see if you are relating to your mirror neurons in a way of this heightened intentionality, because I believe it's going to be very helpful to keep this knowledge going forward.